by and large, the most common tag you'll see in most websites is the division tag. Okay, so the way a division tag looks is like this. It's just div in the opening tag, and then you have a closing div tag. And the way these tags work is you usually wrap stuff inside of them. Okay, so we can wrap this text up like this by putting the closing tag for the division here and the opening one here. And then remember, we'd want to highlight everything and use our tab key for anything inside of those divs and tab them inward. Remember, if you ever need to go back, you just highlight everything and you hold Shift and Tab to move backwards. Okay, so we'll tab inward, and everything in here, all this text, is now nested inside of these div tags right here. Okay, so div tags are very common because they're used for layouts. Okay, so if I go over here and I refresh, you'll see nothing has really changed. Divs are these invisible boxes that end up on your page as you use them. And they allow you to box things out so that you can then use CSS to lay them out and kind of control the size and the placement of each of these divs. So you could almost think of the word div as interchangeable for the word box. Okay, so anytime you say div tags, you kind of just want to imagine that there's a big box now hovering around this text stuff right here. Okay, and we can actually see it if we right click and hit inspect. You'll see if I hover through my HTML, let me widen this a little bit right here. Just widen it a little more. If you see right here, there's this div tag, and look at that. All of that blue right there, that's the space of the div tag in our HTML. And you can actually see the browser's interpretation of our HTML right here below. Whenever I hover over the opening or closing div tag, you can see that entire space is what that div is occupying. So divs are like boxes, and we can put stuff inside of these boxes and then control the placement and the width and the height of these boxes using CSS. Okay, so for example, right here, while I'm highlighted over this div, I could go here where it says element.style, and I could say something like width and set that equal to 200 pixels. And if you notice, it pushed that text away right when I did that. And now when I hover over it, you can see the blue is the div, and that orange color is just margin. That's just extra space on the side of the div. Okay, and it's because I've limited the width using CSS right here with our inspector tool. This is just a playground. And when I refresh the page, these changes will be gone from this playground. But as you can see here, we've controlled the width, and it's kind of squished all of the text inwards to fit within that 200 pixel width. I can uncheck this to bring it back the way it was, or if you just hit refresh, all of those changes are gone. Okay, so that's how divs work. Now, they're not really useful to just kind of sit there as invisible boxes. You'd want to box a number of things together. For example, now that I have these divs here, the opening and closing tags, I could go here and I could divide the H1 and H2 into their own div like this. And I'd want to tab that inward as well like that now. So there's a div nested inside of a larger parent div, as we can see here. And inside of this child div, we have an H1 and H2. Likewise, this H6 and P, the paragraph, same thing. We could put those inside of div at the same level of the child div above. Okay, so if we go right here and add the closing div tag, like this, and then tab these inwards, there we go. We have a child div here, we have another child div right here, and then we have our parent divs right here. Okay, the parent div. It's just one division tag as the parent and two child div tags right here and right here. Okay, it's easy to kind of get your eyes lost in there when you have a lot of div tags. Now, if I save and refresh again, you're not going to see anything change. But if I right click and I inspect, we now have one parent box. Okay, let me expand this again. One parent box right here, as you can see the blue. Then you have one box inside right here. You have another box right there for those two pieces of text. Okay, one here and one right here. So I can now control the individual widths of each of these boxes with CSS, right? So I could go over here and I could do something like width and set that first box to 200 pixels, and then do the same for this other div right here. Set it to something like width of 100 pixels. Okay, so now we have this box. It's 100 pixels wide, and this div right here, the one above it, with the H1 and the H2 inside of it, this is 200 pixels wide. And furthermore, I could go over here and grab this div over here and I could float it to the right with some more CSS. Float it to the right, just like that. And there you go. This is very ugly, but you're starting to see a layout take shape. Okay, and I could float this one to the left. Okay, so of course this looks very ugly, but now you can see there's some text over here to the left. There's some more text over here to the right in another box. Okay, and if I were to actually put borders on these divs, we'll add it to this one right here, for example. We'll say border 1 pixel solid red. You can see where that box is sitting. If I add one over here, we'll say border 1 pixel dotted this time blue. There you go. We've got a div over here. It's occupying that much space and it's pushed, it's kind of floating to the right. We have a div over here, this red one floating to the left. Okay, and everything kind of jumped up inside because we're using these floats. That's what floats do. They kind of break the parent div up a little bit. Now, the main point here, don't get caught up with all of this mess. The reason I'm just showing you this in here in this inspector tool is just to kind of illustrate that these divs are used for layouts. And again, if I go to something like Facebook.com's homepage, you can see layouts in a professional setting. Okay, you have your logo and your call to actions on the left here, and you have forms and buttons and all that other stuff here on the right. That's the whole point of doing these layouts. You want to improve the usability of your website. So in a sense, these division tags, all these divs here are general purpose tags. And like I said, they're one of the most common tags. If you go to any website, let's say this one right here, facebook.com, and we right click and hit inspect, in the inspector tool, you will see more than any other tag, you will typically see these div tags. Look at how many div tags they have going on. They're boxing up literally every piece of text and call to action and icon and image. They're boxing it all out so they can then use their CSS that you can kind of see on this side of the inspector. They use their CSS to control the width and whatnot. Okay, so that's the whole point of these divs, is so that you can put boxes around things and then use your CSS to control those boxes. Okay, so like the div tag, there are a few other common tags that are sort of like these general purpose tags, right? So for example, let me refresh this and get rid of all these changes. Okay, so what if I wanted to, for example, just surround this piece of text and use CSS to change it, just that word heading there? Well, there's a tag specifically for that called the span tag that you can nest inside of, say, some text like this H1 element here. We could put the closing span tag right here before the period or after, doesn't matter. So you can wrap a chunk of text inside of your span tags, or you could wrap an image or wrap anything up inside of these span tags. And if I save it now and I refresh, you're going to see nothing changes here, but now I have control over this and I can use CSS to target this span and change just that word instead of affecting the entire line. For example, if I right click and I say inspect, you can see there's a span there inside of that chunk of text. This is the H1 element itself occupying all of that space. And there's that span tag, and it's just, you can see the blue is just wrapping that word right there, heading. And I could add color to it like this. I could say color red. And only that word right there, anything wrapped inside of the span tag, gets the red treatment to it. Okay, so if I refresh the page, that change goes away. But again, just to illustrate it here, I could use inline CSS. Again, this is a bad practice, but just to show you, I could add the style attribute and set the color to red. And this is CSS syntax, which we're going to learn next. So if I save this and I go over here and refresh, only that word gets affected. So the span tag is useful if you want to wrap specific things and just alter those specific things, okay? So another general purpose tag, like the span tag, I'll leave that there, is the header tag and the footer tags, okay? So just like these div tags here, you can also have headers and footers. These are just kind of descriptive div tags, okay? So in other words, instead of opening the body of your website here with a div tag, you could be a bit more descriptive and say, hey, this is a division or a box where inside of it, I'm going to put a bunch of divs and text and logos